Hare Krishna devotees, welcome to day 96 of our Bhakti Vaibhava seminar on Srimad Bhagavatam, 3rd Canto. And we are in the 32nd chapter, which is titled Entanglement and Fruit of Activities. And we're kind of almost in the middle, not quite, but almost. We're in the section from verse 12 to 21, section titled Different People Achieve Different Goals. And we're actually continuing on from verse 16. So, okay, let's get into it. But first of all, of course, let us chant our prayers. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschityadeja Tarane Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shivas Adi Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Vanchakalpatarubhyas cha kripa sindubhya eva cha Patitanam pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Right, okay, devotees, so here we go. Verse 16. Persons who are too addicted to this material world execute their prescribed duties very nicely and with great faith. They daily perform all such prescribed duties with attachment to the fruit of result. Right, so Srila Prabhupada comments that in this verse, 16, and the following 6 verses, Srimad Bhagavatam criticizes people who are too materially attached. Yes, and the Vedic scriptures, a lot of the Vedic scriptures, like particularly the 4 Vedas and related literatures, they're about materialistic worship, materialistic religion. How to enjoy material facilities and how to acquire material facilities through sacrifice and through undergoing certain ritualistic performances. And to do those things, you have to follow certain rules, regulations, and so on. And it can be a bit complex. And then at the end, you can be elevated to the heavenly planets. But the thing is that it's all very well from the material point of view to go to the heavenly planets and do these sacrifices and all these different things that people do. But the thing is, they cannot become liberated at all unless they change their ways and ultimately become devotees. But with this program as described here, they definitely cannot be liberated at any time. Prabhupada mentions particular type. Those who think they can worship demigods as separate gods, like independent gods, they definitely cannot be elevated to the spiritual world. And what to speak of people who are simply attached to doing their duties for upliftment of their material situations. They're stuck in this material world, generally going up and coming down and going up and coming down like that. But sometimes they go up, they come down, and they keep going down. And they fall down. And they end up in hellish planets. That's the problem with this program. Okay, so anyway, let's go on. Verse 17. Such persons, impelled by the motive passion, are full of anxieties and always aspire for sense gratification due to uncontrolled senses. They worship the forefathers and are busy day and night, improving the economic condition of their family, social, or national life. So means improving, they really try hard to improve the economic condition of their family life, of their social life, or their national life. Right, so we go on to there's no purport. There's no purport to verse 17. So we go on to verse 18. Such persons are called trivargika because they're interested in the three elevating processes. They're averse to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who can give relief to the conditioned soul. They're not interested in the Supreme Personality's pastimes, which are worth hearing because of his transcendental prowess. So, Srila Prabhupada gets into the subject here. So, generally speaking, the Vedas talk about not just three, trivargika means three. Tri means three, vargika means elevating processes. But generally the Vedas talk about four: dharma, artha, kama, moksha, religiosity, economic development, sense gratification, ultimately liberation. So the people who are simply interested in material enjoyment, they're busy, they make plans to do these things. And they develop the economic situation so they can enjoy material life. So they're interested in the elevating processes called trivargika. And Prabhupada explains, actually we already mentioned, tri means three, vargika means elevating processes. So three, the thing is, dharma, artha, and kama, material religiosity, economic development, sense gratification, that's three. They're really interested in those. But we just read, if you remember, that they're not interested in liberation. These very same people. So moksha, even though the Vedas talk about four elevating principles culminating in moksha, but these people, they're just absorbed in material development and material enjoyment. So moksha, they're not interested in actually. So therefore it's three elevating processes. And we mentioned actually, they're never attracted to the Lord. Rather, they're antagonistic towards him. Yeah. They'd rather go for the demigods because the demigods give sense gratification quite easily, even very easily. Whereas Krishna, he wants you to surrender and not just be absorbed in material enjoyment. So they're never attracted to him, and rather they're prone to be antagonistic towards him. So second paragraph, the Lord is described here as Hari Medha, which means he who can deliver one from the cycle of birth and death. So again, these same materialistic people we've been talking about, those same people, they're interested in material, doing sacrifices and other ritualistic things for elevation to heavenly planets. So they're never interested, those same people, They're never interested in hearing about the Lord's pastimes. Even they're prone to think they're fictions and that the Lord is a human. Yeah, so therefore they're not fit for advancing in Krishna consciousness, in devotional service. Neither are they interested in doing that. But they're more interested in newspaper stories, novels, imaginary dramas, that sort of entertainment. But, it's interesting because the Lord's actual activities, such as his involvement in the Battle of Kurukshetra, or in Vrindavan or in Dwaraka, these things are related in Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. They're full of activities, many activities. But the materialists are not interested in these things. They're more interested in the activities of politicians or rich people of this world, but not in the activities of the Lord. So, devotees, we go on to verse 19. Such persons are condemned by the supreme order of the Lord, because they're averse to the nectar of the activities of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. They're compared to stool-eating hogs. They give up hearing the transcendental activities of the Lord and engage in hearing of the abominable activities of materialistic persons. So Prabhupada makes a very interesting point right at the beginning of the purport, that everyone is addicted to hearing about the activities of someone else, someone or even just a number of others, a politician, a rich man, some imaginary character who's in some novel or some literature, James Bond, or someone who never existed and never will exist. Even some speculative philosophy they like. So they're very interested in reading these things. But when they're presented with Shastra, particularly transcendental Shastra, they're not interested. So Prabhupada makes an important point, which is mentioned basically or alluded to in the verse, that they are condemned by the supreme order as much as a hog is condemned. Yeah. And I think we know by now, the hogs are really heavily condemned. They really are. Because the hog, what is the hog? A hog is an animal who's interested in eating stool. Horrible, bad-smelling stool is relishable for the hog. But if he's presented with nice things from condensed milk and ghee, he won't like it. Rather, he'll take some stool. So the materialists, they're condemned because they're interested in hellish activities, not transcendental activities. Yeah. And they are, as Prabhupada said, they're condemned as much as the hog is condemned. That's really condemned. So Srila Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, the message of the Lord's activities is nectar, and besides that message, any information in which we may be interested is actually hellish. Let me read that again. The message of the Lord's activities is nectar. But other than that message, anything other than that message, anything other than the message of the Lord's activities, any other information that people may be interested in, Prabhupada says, is actually hellish. We must remember that. So right, on we go to verse 20. Such materialistic persons are allowed to go to the planet named Pitriloka by the southern course of the sun. But they again come back to this planet and take birth in their own families, beginning again the same fruit of activities from birth to the end of life. So Prabhupada refers to Bhagavad Gita chapter 9, verse 21, which says that these people, we're talking about the same people, the same materialistic people who are doing sacrifices, pious activities to go to heavenly planets. So Bhagavad Gita chapter 9 verse 21 explains that such people, they do go to higher planets. But as soon as their lifetimes in the heavenly planets are finished, as soon as their good karma is finished, they return to this planet. And then they have to work on it again. How to qualify themselves to go up to the higher planets again. And then once they get up there again, they use up all that good karma. And when it's finished, they return to this planet. And so it goes on like this. And even as the verse said, and Prabhupada mentions, that they often again come back into the same family that they were in before, for which they had too much material attachment. Yeah. So they're born, and then fruit of activities go on until the end of that lifetime. So Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, there are different prescribed rituals from birth until the end of life. And these materialistic worshippers, they are very much attached to such activities. Right, so verse 21. And here we go. When the results of their pious activities are exhausted, they fall down by higher arrangement and again come back to this planet, just as any person raised to a high position sometimes all of a sudden falls. So Srila Prabhupada comments that, and I mean, we see it happen sometimes. Someone in the government gets elevated to a high position, but then something goes wrong, and suddenly they fall down, and no one can really help the person. And, this was reminding me when I read this first of the previous Prime Minister of England, Boris Johnson, who was just a real case. I mean, he was not like what you would hope for in a Prime Minister, like a real gentleman who's really thinking of helping others and helping his countrymen, and very respectful and so on. Yeah. I mean, he was just a bit of a crazy fellow, really, in at least in many respects. And so he fell down, and no one can really help him. I mean, he'd like to have another go at being Prime Minister, but it seems the likelihood of that is just extremely small, or perhaps zero. So similarly, these materialistic worshippers, people who do these sacrifices and different rituals and so on, after their period of enjoyment is finished, after the karma that they accrued on this planet last time, after that good karma is finished, the good karma takes them to the higher planets, but when they've enjoyed there and the karma is finished, they just come down to this planet. So Prabhupada makes a very interesting and very important point. The distinction between the elevated position of a devotee and that of an ordinary person attracted to fruitive activities is that, listen to this, when a devotee is elevated to the spiritual kingdom, he never falls down. Whereas an ordinary person falls, even if they're elevated to Brahmaloka, which is the highest position in the material world. Yes. So Bhagavad Gita 8:16, I think it is, isn't it? Abramal Bhuvanal Loka. From the highest planet, Brahmaloka, to the lowest, they're all places of misery, of repeated birth and death. So, like this, these materialistic worshippers, when they've burnt up their karma, they come back here to the earth level. But the devotees, Krishna confirms in Bhagavad Gita 8:16, Mam upecha tu konteya punarjanma na vijate. Punarjanma means again taking birth. So punarjanma na. They don't take birth again. So Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, well, he quotes what I've just quoted. Krishna confirms in Bhagavad Gita 8:16, Mamupecha de konteya punarjanmana vijate, which means anyone who attains my abode never comes back to this conditioned life of material existence. So, devotees, we continue on to the next section. Section 6. It's from verse 22 to verse 30. And we've called it, Kapila advises Devahuti further to do devotional service. Verse 22 to verse 30. And you may remember that we read verse 11 on its own. And it's just one verse on its own in which Kapila advises Devahuti to do devotional service for going back to Godhead. So, but that was just one verse. Now he's going to advise her further to do devotional service. So it's 9 verses. So let us read through the translations, just so we get a clear idea what is the picture in this section. So verse 22, My dear mother, I therefore advise that you take shelter of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, for his lotus feet are worth worshipping. Accept this with all devotion and love, for thus you can be situated in transcendental devotional service. 23. Engagement in Krishna consciousness and application of devotional service unto Krishna make it possible to advance in knowledge and detachment, as well as in self-realization. 24. The exalted devotee's mind becomes equipoised in sensory activities, and he is transcendental to that which is agreeable and not agreeable. 25. Because of his transcendental intelligence, the pure devotee is equipoised in his vision and sees himself to be uncontaminated by matter. He does not see anything as superior or inferior, and he feels himself elevated to the transcendental platform of being equal in qualities with the Supreme Person. That's interesting. Verse 26, the Supreme Personality of Godhead alone is complete transcendental knowledge, but according to the different processes of understanding, he appears differently, either as impersonal Brahman, as Paramatma, as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, means as Krishna, or as the Purusha Avatar. Right, so verse 27. The greatest common understanding for all yogis is complete detachment from matter, which can be achieved by different kinds of yoga. 28. Those who are averse to the transcendence realize the supreme absolute truth differently through speculative sense perception, and therefore, because of mistaken speculation, everything appears to them to be relative. So that's the people who are averse to the transcendence. Yeah. They get some realization, but it's all mixed up. Right, okay, so anyway, verse 29. From the total energy, the Mahatattva, I have manifested the false ego, the 3 modes of material nature, the 5 material elements, the individual consciousness, the 11 senses, and the material body. Similarly, the entire universe has come from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Right, so let's now read verse 30, which is the last verse in this section. This perfect knowledge can be achieved by a person who is already engaged in devotional service with faith, steadiness, and full detachment, and who is always absorbed in thought of the Supreme. He is aloof from material association. So this is Kapila advising Devahuti further that you should do devotional service. 22 to 30, verse 22. My dear mother, I therefore advise that you take shelter of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, for his lotus feet are worth worshipping. Accept this with all devotion and love, for thus you can be situated in transcendental devotional service. All right, let's go through the purport. Prabhupada refers to the verse. In there we find the word parameshtinam. It's sometimes used in connection with Lord Brahma, but actually Parameshti means the Supreme Person. But as Brahma is the Supreme Person within the universe, so to speak, if we leave out Garbhadakshay Vishnu, Shiradakshay Vishnu, but otherwise Brahma is the Supreme Person within the universe. So in the spiritual world, Krishna is the Supreme Personality. So Lord Kapila is advising his mother, Devahuti, please take shelter of the lotus feet of Lord Krishna. He's the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So please take shelter of his lotus feet, because it is worthwhile, which is kind of a conservative way of saying that it is really valuable much more valuable than anything material elevation, higher planets, etc. So Prabhupada continues in the first paragraph, taking shelter of demigods, even those in the highest positions like Brahma and Shiva, is not advised. One should take shelter of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So then we go on to the second paragraph, and Prabhupada refers to the term from the verse, Sarva Bhavena. Let me just check. It's at the end of the first line of the Sanskrit of the verse. So yeah, Sarva Bhavena means in all loving ecstasy. So it's a slightly interesting way of putting it. I mean, slightly unusual. All loving means loving all, but means just completely absorbed in love, in loving ecstasy. So Prabhupada refers to Bhagavad Gita chapter 10 verse 8, Buddha Bhava Samanvita, that, well, Lord Krishna says there that he is the source of all spiritual and material worlds. Everything emanates from him. And the wise people who know this perfectly, nicely, they worship him with all their hearts. In bhava, they worship him in bhava, in a mood of love. So Prabhupada here makes the point that one who has reached the level of bhava can accept the lotus feet of the Lord as worshipable, and he advises Devahuti to do this. Then another significant term is Tad Gunashrayaya Bhaktya, which is somewhere, where is it? Oh, it's the third line of the Sanskrit in the verse. Yeah, Tad Gunashrayaya means Lord Krishna's transcendental qualities are so sublime that there's no need to divert your attention to anything else at all. Yes, no need. And indeed, if you really develop a taste for those qualities and activities of Lord Krishna, then you won't want to divert your attention. But these people, these materialistic worshippers, they're already diverted. So, but anyway, Krishna's behavior with his devotees is just so wonderful that a devotee, you don't need to divert your attention to any other type of worship. And Prabhupada gives the example of Putana. Putana came to kill Krishna, to poison him. But he agreed, Prabhupada says, he was pleased to suck her breast, because she presented herself in a motherly type of way, at least externally, right at that point. So, but because Krishna was pleased to suck her breast, she was given a position like mother in Goloka Vrindavan. So therefore devotees pray that if a demon who wanted to kill Krishna got that position, then why should we, the devotees, try to go to anyone other than Krishna for our worshipping? Yeah. That we only need to go to worship Krishna. That's all. Prabhupada points out there are two kinds of religious activity, one for material advancement, the other for spiritual advancement. And Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, by taking shelter under the lotus feet of Krishna, one is endowed with both kinds of prosperity, material and spiritual. Why then should one go to any demigod? Well, you shouldn't. That's the point. Verse 23, engagement in Krishna consciousness and application of devotional service unto Krishna make it possible to advance in knowledge and detachment as well as in self-realization. So there's a fairly extensive purport. Well, yeah, it's a fairly extensive purport, not extremely. So Prabhupada comments that less intelligent men say Bhakti Yoga is for people who are not advanced in transcendental knowledge and renunciation. But we have read in the first canto that if we do devotional service, if we do Bhakti Yoga, then we don't have to try separately for detachment or transcendental knowledge. They come automatically. That, I forget the verse number, but I think it's the second chapter of first canto. Vasudeve Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga Prayojata Janayat Yasu Vairagyam Jnanam Chayadahoy to come. That for anyone who's gained in devotional anyone who's engaged in devotional service unto Lord Vasudeva, means Krishna, the son of Vasudeva, then Janayat Yasu Vairagyam Jnanam Chayad Ahoy to come, causelessly detachment and material knowledge manifest in one's heart and in one's life. Yes. Causelessly in the sense that you don't have to make a special effort to detach yourself, become free from, whatever things you're attracted to materially. And you don't need to work hard to develop transcendental knowledge. You just do devotional service, and the detachment and transcendental knowledge just appear in your heart. And we read from the, 7-8-12, I think, something like that. That one who does devotional service unflinchingly develops all the good qualities of the demigods automatically. You may not see how it's happening. They may not make some special effort to improve how they speak or how they act necessarily, but they start showing the personal qualities of the demigods. And then Srila Prabhupada refers to the story of Mrigari the hunter. I think you're all familiar with that. He was half killing animals, but then he met Narada Muni, and Narada Muni convinced him to stop and to become a devotee. Narada Muni actually showed him how the different animals that he's been half killing, they're all going to come back and attack him. So Mrigari was very disturbed by that, and he asked what to do. Well, he actually said, I kill these animals so I can provide for my family. So Mrigari said, anyway, no, that's not Mrigari. That's Valmiki. But anyway, Mrigari, Narada Muni did show him that the animals would come and attack him. So therefore he changed his ways and became a devotee. And when Narada came back to visit him, in the company of Parashara, I think it was, Parashara Muni, they're approaching where Mrigari was living, now living as a devotee. And Mrigari came running out when he saw, here is my guru, Narada Muni. So he's running and running, but suddenly they saw he stopped, and he's sort of hopping around from one side to the other in a very awkward way. And then he came and met them. And Narada Muni asked him, why? Why are you hopping around in that strange way? And Mrigari said, there was a stream of ants across the path. I didn't want to step on one. So it was just making sure I stepped on where there's ground and where there's no ant. And Parashara Muni was amazed, just see how you've transformed this person. Previously he was killing so many animals in horrible ways. Now he won't even hurt an ant. This is the character of a devotee. So, there's a second paragraph. Those who want to advance in transcendental knowledge, they can just do pure devotional service. They don't need to waste their time for mental speculation. Yeah. The term Brahma Darshanam is used, and Prabhupada says it's significant here. It means to realize or understand transcendental knowledge. So if we do devotional service, we can realize what Brahman is. And it's interesting, Brahma Darshanam, Prabhupada makes an interesting point. If Brahman is impersonal, how can we have darshan of it? Darshan means to see someone face to face. So darshanam then refers to seeing the Lord, and unless the seer, the one who sees, and the one who is seen are persons, then the seer will not be able to see, and the person to be seen, there'll be no darshan of that person. So you see, Brahma Darshanam then means that as soon as one sees the Lord, he can immediately realize the nature, the real nature of Brahman. Yes. So devotee doesn't need to make separate investigations to understand the nature of Brahman. And Prabhupada says that Bhagavad Gita confirms this, Brahma Bhuyaya Kalpate. The devotee at once becomes a self-realized soul in the absolute truth. 24. The exalted devotee's mind becomes equipoised in sensory activities, and he's transcendental to that which is agreeable and not agreeable. So Prabhupada begins the purport by saying, the significance of advancement in transcendental knowledge and detachment from material attraction is exhibited in the personality of a highly advanced devotee. For such a devotee, nothing is agreeable or disagreeable to him, because he's not interested in his personal sense gratification. So there's no evaluation, is it good for me or not good for me? Doesn't matter. Whatever he does or thinks, it's for the Lord. Is it suitable? Will the Lord be pleased with this? Like that. So otherwise, because of this, whether he's in the material world or spiritual world, he's completely equipoised. He understands in the material world nothing is good, everything is bad, due to the contamination of material nature. Of course, it's not exactly mentioned here, but there's a point which, Prabhupada talks about a lot, but not right here, is that the advanced devotee can utilize so many, practically any material thing in Krishna's service, and then it becomes good. But otherwise, just in and of themselves, all the different things in the material world, none of them are good. Everything's bad due to the contamination of material nature. So therefore, the materialist's conclusions their ideas of what is good and what is bad, what is moral, what is immoral. They're all mental concoctions or sentiments. And rather, nothing is good in the material world. But in the spiritual world, everything is good absolutely. And there's no inebriety in spiritual varieties. So because the devotee accepts everything spiritually, he's equipoised. That is the symptom of his being in the transcendental position. So he automatically attains vairagya and jnana, and then real transcendental knowledge. So Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, the conclusion is that an advanced devotee dovetails himself in the transcendental qualities of the Lord, and in that sense he becomes qualitatively one with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Verse 25. Because of his transcendental intelligence, the pure devotee is equipoised in his vision and sees himself to be uncontaminated by matter. He does not see anything as superior or inferior, and he feels himself elevated to the transcendental platform of being equal in qualities with the Supreme Person. So, right, the perception of things being disagreeable arises from attachment. That because I like certain types of food, for example, so I'm attached to them. But other types of food I don't like, so I'm detached from them. But the thing is, some of the foods which I like, which are agreeable for me, some other people don't like, they're disagreeable for them. And some things which are disagreeable for me, some others like that, they find those things agreeable. Prabhupada mentioned the hog, if you remember. The hog, the classic example is nice, hot, sweet halava. Any human being in his right mind will love that. But the hog will just ignore it, and he'll go for some stool. So anyway, the devotee has no personal attachment to anything, so there's no question of agreeable or disagreeable. For the Lord's service, if it's suitable for the Lord, he'll accept anything, even though it may be disagreeable in his personal sense. But he's completely free from personal interest. So anything agreeable to the Lord is agreeable to him. And of course, classic example is Arjuna. As we know very well in the beginning of Bhagavad Gita, first chapter, he felt fighting was disagreeable to him. But when he understood it was agreeable to the Lord, then he accepted it as agreeable. And he fought and he won. So that is the position of the pure devotee. For personal interest, nothing is agreeable or disagreeable. Everything is done for the Lord, so the devotee is free from attachment and detachment. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, that is the transcendental stage of neutrality. A pure devotee enjoys life in the pleasure of the Supreme Lord. In other words, when the devotee, pure devotee, sees the Lord is pleased, then he naturally becomes pleased. He shares the pleasure of the Supreme Lord. And if the Supreme Lord is displeased, the pure devotee feels displeased. So, okay, on to verse 26. The Supreme Personality of Godhead alone is complete transcendental knowledge. But according to the different processes of understanding, he appears differently, either as impersonal Brahman, as Paramatma, as the Supreme Personality of Godhead means Krishna, or as the Purusha avatar. Right, so, yeah, this is quite a major verse with a major purport. Anyway, that's fine. Let's go into it. So in the verse, there's the term drishyadibi. It's significant. It means, according to the Sanskrit, drishyadibi means by philosophical research and other processes. So Prabhupada says, according to Jiva Goswami, drishi means gyan, philosophical research, which we just said basically. So by different processes of that philosophical research, like Jnana Yoga, the Supreme Lord, Bhagavan, he's actually the Supreme Personality, but they may understand that, he's the impersonal Brahman. And similarly, someone who's doing Ashtanga Yoga, for him, Bhagavan, Sri Krishna, Krishna himself, appears as Paramatma. So, but when someone is in pure Krishna consciousness, a more elevated state than either the Jnana Yogi or the Ashtanga Yogi, when one tries to understand the absolute truth in pure Krishna consciousness, one realizes him as the Supreme Person, Lord Sri Krishna. So therefore the transcendence is realized on the basis of knowledge. Whatever your knowledge, whatever your understanding is, you'll realize the transcendence in those terms. So then again, Prabhupada refers to some words from the verse, Paramatmeshvara Puman, the super soul who's the controller. Super soul who's the controller. So anyway, the words used here, Paramatmeshvara Puman, are all transcendental. They refer to the super soul, who is also described as Purusha. But the word Bhagavan directly refers to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Sri Krishna, who is full of the six opulences, wealth, fame, strength, beauty, knowledge, and renunciation. And he is the personality of Godhead in different spiritual skies. So Prabhupada says the various descriptions of Paramatma, Ishvara, and Puman indicate that the expansions of the Supreme Godhead are unlimited. Second paragraph. So, but the thing is, ultimately to understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, Bhagavan, you have to perform Bhakti Yoga, devotional service. By doing Jnana Yoga or Dhyana Yoga, Dhyana Yoga is part of Ashtanga Yoga, one has to eventually approach the Bhakti Yoga platform. Eventually you have to take up devotional service. And then you'll be able to understand Paramatma, Ishvara, Puman, etc. clearly, properly. Prabhupada mentions how in the second canto of the Bhagavatam, it's recommended, whether you're a devotee, a materialist, after liberation, you should just seriously perform devotional service. Yes. So, in other words, whatever you want, which is obtainable by material fruit of activity, even going to the higher planets, can be achieved by executing devotional service. And Prabhupada concludes that second paragraph, Since the Supreme Lord is full in 6 opulences, he can bestow any one of them upon the worshipper, or any 2 or 3. So now here we are in the 3rd paragraph. The one Lord reveals himself to different thinkers as Supreme Person, means Krishna, the impersonal Brahman, or the Supersoul. The impersonalists, of course, they merge or want to merge into the impersonal Brahman. But if they simply focus on worshipping the impersonal Brahman as such, and only that, they will not be able to merge. But if they take to devotional service and at the same time want to merge, then they can achieve that because they've added devotional service. So Prabhupada concludes the paragraph by saying, if someone desires at all to merge into the existence of the Supreme, he has to execute devotional service. And devotees, there is another paragraph which is quite a substantial one. Let's just go through it though. So the devotee can see the Lord face to face, but the jnani, the empiric philosopher, the Ashtanga yogi, they can't. They can't come by doing those practices. They can't come to the position of being an associate of the Lord. And Prabhupada makes the point, it's very important. There is no evidence, there is no example from Shastra, from history, of a jnani becoming an associate of the Lord on the basis of being a jnani, or an empiric philosopher, or an Ashtanga yogi. No examples in the histories. So anyway, the impersonal Brahman is formless. It's described here as adrishya. Drishi means by philosophical research and other processes. But anyway, Prabhupada says, here the statement drishyadapi is significant. Since the Supreme Lord is both invisible and visible, so there are different features of him. Paramatma and Brahman are invisible, because you don't see the Lord. You see something other than the Lord. Even Paramatma is not exactly the Lord in the ultimate sense of him being Sri Krishna. And Brahman, of course, is just an effulgence. So therefore, Paramatma and Brahman are invisible, whereas Bhagavan Sri Krishna is visible. And the universal form and Brahman, they're invisible, they're inferior. And Prabhupada makes an interesting point. He quotes Vishnu Purana, Vishnur Brahmaswarupena Swayam eva vyavastitaha, that the real feature, the real swarup means just the real thing. The real feature of Brahman is Lord Vishnu, Vishnur Brahmaswarupena. So the swarup of Brahman is Lord Vishnu. And Swayam eva means it's his personal feature. So, therefore, the supreme spiritual conception is the Supreme Lord Sri Krishna. And then Prabhupada talks about the abode. In Bhagavad Gita it said, Krishna says, Yad gatva nanavartante tad dhamma paramam mama. That the Lord's abode is called paramam mama. It's the place from which, once you've gone there, you don't return to this material world. Yad gatva nanavartante. Going there you don't return to this place. So Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, every place, every space, and everything belongs to Vishnu. But where he personally lives is Tad-dhamma paramam, his supreme abode. One has to make one's destination the supreme abode of the Lord. So there you go, devotees. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.